This is an Intel Core i7 3770K. It's basically one of Intel's fastest processors that's currently available. I picked it up because I wanted something that I can keep for years to come and still not feel slow. Anytime I've purchased something that was slightly slower, slightly cheaper, whatever, I've always kind of like, within a year or two, you kind of feel, it feels like it's chugging a little bit. The last time I bought a processor, I bought one of the top-of-the-line processors, it still feels good even right now. Like I've been hesitant to even upgrade my machine at this point because it still runs really, really good. Like I'm just now feeling a little bit of slowness, and it's very minor. But that being said, I'm going with this processor because it's the best processor that they've got on the market right now, at least in this price range. There are some really ridiculous ones that aren't meant for general user consumption, but this is the best one for that. The other one that a lot of people recommend is the i5 3570K, which is also another really good processor. It's about $100 cheaper than this one. This one I got for $289 from Micro Center. You can get the other one for about $189, and it's not a bad way to go. These two processors are very comparable. This one just happens to be a bit better for video editing and a few other things that I kind of like dabbling in, while the other one is more geared towards gamers. But this one also does gaming well, but this one will do other things I needed to, so this is why I went with this processor. Okay, so let's open this box up and show you what you're going to be looking at, which the processor itself is going to be kind of small. You're not really going to see much there. But any processor you buy comes with the CPU fan that you're going to put over the processor itself. And you may not want to use the fan that comes with it. Nowadays, I think that these processors don't run as hot as they used to, so the standard CPU fan is enough to keep things cool. At some other point, we'll get into overclocking your motherboard and overclocking the processor, in which case maybe you want something a bit cooler because when you overclock, it'll warm things up a bit. But for now, if you're just doing your standard work, the fan that comes with it is fine. And this is a look at the processor itself. There isn't really much to see. It's just a chip that will slide nicely into the motherboard. Okay. And I'll show you next how to actually put it onto the board and everything else. Okay, so for mounting the CPU into the motherboard, the first thing to take note on the CPU itself, there's a little tiny gold speck down there, a little triangle, that shows you where to line up the CPU into the motherboard. And on the motherboard itself, usually there'll be some type of marking. In this case, there's a little triangle right here that shows where exactly that triangle should fit into. So on the motherboard, there's a latch here that you just, it's spring-loaded or whatever, you just move that way. And then you can lift up this piece. There's a little protector there that you have to remove in order to get the CPU in. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes not so much. There we go. And all of the little pin receptacles are visible now. So to put the CPU in, it's actually very simple. If you have everything facing the right way, once again making sure that you have the triangle piece lined up with where it was showing before, you just put it right down on top of it. Shouldn't have to do any more work. There are little tiny notches that you can see also line up there as well. Put it down. Put the lever back in place. And that's it. The CPU is mounted, and next comes the fan that goes on top. Now for mounting the fan, it doesn't have a specific orientation that it needs to go into because it's a square, so you can kind of mount it however you want. But the one thing to look out for on your board itself is where the CPU fan is located. This connector is a connector that the fan will have to connect to. So the fan connector here is going to have to plug into here, so you're better off having this as close to this as possible. And you can move the cable as need be to make that happen. Like this right now is tucked into this, which I can undo, and I can have this sit like this. I'm just deciding on how I want this to be. You've got to make sure that this cable doesn't get in the way of the turning blades when this is spinning, or else it'll stop the fan from spinning and the CPU is going to heat up. Oh, one other thing about these fans is that there's thermal paste on the bottom of the fan itself to help bring the heat of the CPU into the fan as this cools it off. So that's just important just to know, just for if you ever buy a new cooler or whatever, you're going to need thermal paste on the bottom of this piece here. And I accidentally got my finger on it, so you can see thermal paste there. It's not a big deal though, I can clean that off easy enough. And you have your 4 posts which line up with these 4 holes on the motherboard itself. So all you have to do is push this in place. You're going to need to lift up the motherboard just a little bit to push all 4 pins in. And now they're in. The only thing left to do is to plug in the fan into the motherboard itself, and that's where the power comes in. It also has some controlling mechanisms. If the motherboard feels that the fan is too hot, it'll tell the fan to spin faster or slower, depending on the power and consumption needs. Oops, I don't think this one's pushed in all the way. Maybe it is, and I'm just seeing it wrong from the angle. Okay, cool. And if you look at it from the bottom, you can see all 4 pins stick through. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 right there, and that's all there is to it.